The history of Christianity in Ukraine dates back to the earliest centuries of the Apostolic Church. It has remained the dominant religion in the country since its acceptance in 988 by Vladimir the Great, who instated it as the state religion of Kievan Rus, a medieval East Slavic state and establishment of the Kiev Metropolis. Although separated into various denominations, most Ukrainian Christians share a common faith, based on the Eastern Christian tradition. This tradition is represented in Ukraine by both Eastern Orthodox and Eastern Catholic churches, which have been at various historic times closely aligned with Ukrainian national self-identity. Currently, three major Ukrainian Orthodox churches coexist and often compete in the country: the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Kievan Patriarchate, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, and the Ukrainian Autocephalous Orthodox Church. Additionally, a significant body of Christians belong to the Eastern Rite Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, and a smaller number are in the Ruthenian Catholic Church, while Western Christian traditions such as Roman Catholicism and Protestantism have had a limited presence on the territory of Ukraine since at least the 16th century. Worshippers of these traditions remain a relatively small minority in today's Ukraine. Early history. Christianity was most likely first introduced into the lands of present-day Ukraine by the Goths, who established the Cherniakov culture in the 2nd century. Although not a Christian people as a whole, the incoming Ostrogoths certainly had relations with Christian centers such as Rome and had come across missionaries in the lands they had previously inhabited. It is therefore believed that some of the Gothic inhabitants of Oium were Christian, as they had established churches in other lands occupied by the Goths. However, the Gothic control over the area proved to be short-lived, as the Hunnic Empire swept into the area in the 4th century, making any lasting impression by the Goths unlikely. Metropolitan Ilarion and other scholars have suggested that earlier Tripolian and Scythian religious practices and hierarchical pantheism influenced Christianity's later development in Ukraine. Saint Andrew. Saint Andrew the Apostle is believed to have traveled up the western shores of the Black Sea to the area of present-day southern Ukraine, while preaching in the lands of Scythia. Legend has it that he traveled further still, up the Dnieper River, until he came to the location of present-day Kiev in 55 AD, where he erected a cross and prophesied the foundation of a great Christian city. Belief in the missionary visit of Saint Andrew became widespread by the Middle Ages, and by 1621, a Kiev synod had declared him the Rus apostle. St. Titus, a disciple of St. Andrews, is also venerated in Ukrainian churches, as are three Scythian disciples, Saints Sina, Pina and Rima, who accompanied him to the Kiev. Both the 18th-century Church of St. Andrew and an earlier structure from 1086 it replaced were purportedly built on the very location of the Apostles' Cross, planted on a hill overlooking the city of Kiev. Although the primary chronicle refers to the apostle continuing his journey as far north as Novgorod, St. Andrew's visit to any of these lands has not been proven, and in fact may have been a later invention designed to boost the autocephalic aspirations in the territories where the upper clergy continued to be dominated by Greeks for several centuries. Crimean Roots. According to a 9th-century tradition, Pope Clement I was exiled to Chersonesos on the Crimean Peninsula in 102, as was Pope Martin I in 655. Furthermore, it has been definitively recorded that a representative from the Black Sea area, the head of the Scythian bishopric, was present at the First Council of Nicaea in 325, as well as the First Council of Constantinople in 381. It has been surmised that this representative would have to have been Bishop Cadmus of the Bosporan Kingdom, Ostrogoths, who remained on present-day Ukrainian lands after the invasion of the Huns, established a metropolitanate under the Bishop of Constantinople at Doros in northern Crimea around the year 400. A bishop's seat had also existed, since 868 across the Strait of Kerch, in the ancient city of Teutonicon. The Polans and the Antes cultures, located so close to the Crimea, surely became familiarized with Christianity by this time. Saints Cyril and Methodius, the relics of Pope St. Martin, were allegedly retrieved by the apostles' brothers Saints Cyril and Methodius, who passed through present-day Ukraine on the way to preach to the Khazars, sent from Constantinople at the request of the ruler of Great Moravia. These brothers would add to the foundation of Christianity in Ukraine by creating the Glagolitic alphabet, a precursor to the eponymous Cyrillic script, which enabled the local population to worship God in Old Church Slavonic, a language closer to the vernacular Old East Slavic language than the Greek used to worship in Constantinople, or Latin in the West. In response to local disputes with clerics of the Latin Church, Cyril and Methodius appealed in person to the Bishop of Rome in 867, bringing with them the relics of Pope St. Martin from Chersonesos. Their labors and requests were met with approval, and their continued efforts planted the Christian faith into Ukrainian Rus. By 906, they had founded a diocese in Peremyshal, now Przemysl in present-day Poland, at the western edge of Ukraine. Their efforts, and those of their apostles, led to the translation of Christian scriptures and service from Greek to Slavonic, and the eventual development of the modern Cyrillic alphabet. Early Rus period. By the 9th century, it is known that the Slavic population of western Ukraine had accepted Christianity while under the rule of Great Moravia. However, it was the East Slavs who came to dominate most of the territory of present-day Ukraine, beginning with the rule of the Rus, whose pantheon of gods had held a considerable following for over 600 years. Following the 860 assault on Constantinople by Rus forces under the command of Askold and Yaya, the two princes were baptized in that holy city. Returning to Kiev, the two actively championed Christianity for a period of 20 years, until they were murdered by the pagan Prince Oleg in the interprincely rivalry for the Kiev throne. Patriarch Photios purportedly provided a bishop and priests from Constantinople to help in the Christianization of the Slavists. By 900, a church was already established in Kiev, St. Elijah's, modeled on a church of the same name in Constantinople. This gradual acceptance of Christianity is most notable in the Rus Byzantine Treaty of 945, which was signed by both baptized and unbaptized Rus. According to the text included in the primary chronicle, establishment of the Kiev Metropolitan Christianity acceptance among the Rus nobility gained a vital proponent when Princess Olga, the ruler of Kiev, became baptized, taking the Christian name Helen. Her baptism in 955 in either Kiev or Constantinople was a turning point in religious life of Rus, but it was left to her grandson, Vladimir the Great, to make Kievan Rus a Christian state. Both Vladimir and Olga are venerated as the equal to apostles saints by the Eastern Orthodox Church. Princess Olga of Kiev shortly after her baptism appealed to the Holy Roman Emperor Otto the Great to send missionaries into Kievan Rus. Saint Adalbert, a Latin missionary bishop from Germany, was sent, but his missions and the priests who missionized along with him were stopped. Most of the group of Latin missionaries were slain by pagan forces sent by Olga's son, Prince Sviatoslav, who had taken the crown from his mother. Christianity became dominant in the territory with the mass baptism of Kiev in the Dnieper River in 988, ordered by Vladimir. That year is considered as the year of establishment of the Kiev Metropolis and part of the Ecumenical Patriarchate of Constantinople. The exact date of establishment is not clearly known, as the Kiev epoch is mentioned as early as 891. The first cathedral temple, Church of the Tithes, was built in 996. Following the Great Schism in 1054, the Kievan Rus that incorporated some of the modern Ukraine ended up on the Eastern Orthodox Byzantine side of the divided Christian world. Early on, the Orthodox Christian metropolitans had their seat in Pereyaslav, and later in Kiev. The people of Kiev lost the metropolitan to Vladimir Suzdal in 1299, but gained a new metropolitan in Halych in 1303. The religious affairs were also ruled in part by a metropolitan in Novgorod. After the breakup of the Kievan Rus in the 15th century, the primacy over the Ukrainian Church was restored to Kiev under the title Metropolitan of Kiev, Halych and all Rus. One clause of the Union of Krevo stipulated that Jagiello would disseminate Roman Catholicism among Orthodox subjects of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, of which Ukraine was a part. The opposition from the Ostrogs and other Orthodox magnates led to this policy being suspended in the early 16th century. Following the Union of Lublin, the Polonization of the Ukrainian Church was accelerated. Unlike the Roman Catholic Church, the Orthodox Church in Ukraine was liable to various taxes and legal obligations. The building of new Orthodox churches was strongly discouraged. The Roman Catholics were strictly forbidden to convert to Orthodoxy, and the marriages between Catholics and Orthodox were frowned upon. Orthodox subjects had been increasingly barred from high offices of state. The Union of Brest and its aftermath in order to oppose such restrictions and to reverse cultural Polonization of Orthodox bishops. The Ecumenical Patriarch encouraged the activity of the Orthodox urban communities called the Brotherhoods. In 1589, Hedion Balaban, the Bishop of Lviv, asked the Pope to take him under his protection, because he was exasperated by the struggle with urban communities and the Ecumenical Patriarch. He was followed by the bishops of Lusk, Chum, and Turov in 1590. In the following years, the bishops of Volodymyr Vilinsky and Przemysl and the Metropolitan of Kiev announced the secession from the Ecumenical Patriarchate of Constantinople, which was increasingly influenced by the Ottomans. In 1595, some representatives of this group arrived to Rome and asked Pope Clement VIII to take them under his jurisdiction and unite them to the Apostolic See of St. Peter. In the Union of Brest of 1596, a part of the Ukrainian Church was accepted under the jurisdiction of the Roman Pope, becoming a Byzantine Rite Catholic Church, a Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, colloquially known as the Uniate Church. While the new church gained many faithful among the Ukrainians in Galicia, the majority of Ukrainians in the rest of the lands remained within Eastern Orthodoxy, with the church affairs ruled by then from Kiev under the Metropolitan Peter Mogila. The Orthodox Church was made illegal, its property confiscated, and Orthodox believers faced persecution and discrimination, which became an important reason for large numbers of Ukrainians to emigrate to Tsardom of Russia following the Union. The eastward spread of the Union of Brest led to violent clashes. For example, Assassination of the Greek Catholic Metropolitan Joseph Atkunzevich by the Orthodox mob in Polotsk in 1623. Khmelnytsky Uprising. As the Unia continued its expansion into Ukraine, its unpopularity grew, particularly in the southern steppes where Dnieper Cossacks lived. The Cossacks valued the traditions and culture, saw the Unia as a final step of Polonization. As a result, they reacted by becoming fierce proponents of orthodoxy. Such feelings played a role in the mass uprising, whose targets included all non-Orthodox religious proponents, the Catholic and Uniate clergy, and Jews. During this time, Metropolitan Mogila took full advantage of the moment to restore the Orthodox domination in Ukraine, including returning one of its sacred buildings, the St. Sophia Cathedral in Kiev. Rule of the empires. Territories gained by Pereyaslav Rada. In 1686, 40 years after Mogila's death, the Ottomans, acting on the behalf of the Regent of Russia Sophia Alexeyevna, pressured the Patriarch of Constantinople into transferring the Orthodox Church of Kiev and all hers from the jurisdiction of Constantinople to the Patriarch of Moscow, established a century prior to that. The legality of this step is occasionally questioned to this day, along with the fact that the transfer was accompanied by graft and bribery, which in church affairs amounts to an ecclesiastical crime. The transfer itself, however, led to the significant Ukrainian domination of the Russian Orthodox Church, which continued well into the 18th century. Ferovan Prokopovich, Epiphany Slavnetsky, Stephen Yavorsky, and Demetrius of Rostov being among the most notable representatives of this trend. Territories gained from Crimean Khanate. In the late 18th century, the Crimean Khanate was conquered by Russia, and the latter annexed most of the southern steppes and Crimea. Colonization of these lands was actively encouraged by Orthodox people, particularly Ukrainians, Russians and Serbs. As New Russia was settled, new Orthodox parishes were created. Construction of cathedrals that demonstrate some of the finest examples of late 19th century Russian architecture was undertaken in large cities, such as Odessa and Sevastopol. Territories gained from partitions. In the late 17th century, the Poland became less and less influential, and internal corruption as well as the pressure from its powerful neighbors resulted in its partitions by neighboring empires. The Russian Empire, in particular, gained most of ethnically Ukrainian land and all of the Belarusian lands. After nearly 2 centuries of Polonization, the Uniate influence on the Ukrainian population was so great that hardly any remained Orthodox, although some, particularly in Podolia, chose to revert to Orthodoxy soon after. This in many cases was an exception rather than trend, and in locations where the Unia already gave deep roots into the population, all of the church property remained in the Catholic and Uniate authority. Also significant was Empress Catherine II's decree on the newly acquired territory, according to which most of the Polish magnates retained all the lands and property in the newly acquired lands. Nevertheless, the first Russophile tendencies began to surface, and came in face of the Uniate Bishop Joseph Semashko, believing that the Uniate Church's role as an interim bridge between Orthodoxy and their eventual path to Catholicism is over. Now that the ruler of the lands is no longer a Catholic but an Orthodox monarch, he began to push for an eventual reversion of all Uniates. Although the idea was shared by a growing number of the lower priests, the ruling Uniate Synod, controlled by the strong Polish influence, rejected all Semashko's suggestions. In addition, many of the Latin Catholic authorities responded to this by actively converting the Uniates to Latin Rite Catholicism. In 1831, the general discontent of the Poles quarrels with the Russian rule erupted into a revolt, now known as the November Uprising, which the Uniate Church officially supported. However, the uprising failed, and the Russian authorities were quick to respond to its organizers and areas of strongest support. The outcome was that the Uniate Synod's members were removed along with most of the Polish magnates' privileges and authority being taken away, with the Polish influence in the Ruthenian lands significantly reduced and in some cases eliminated. The Uniate Church began to disintegrate. In Volhynia, the famous Poche of Lavra was returned to Russian Orthodox clergy in 1833. The final blow came from the Synod of Polotsk in 1839, headed by the ex-Uniate Bishop Semashko, where it was agreed to terminate the Accords of Union of Brest and all of the remaining Uniate property on the territory of the Belarusian Right Bank Ukraine within the Russian Empire was incorporated into the Russian Orthodox Church. Those Uniate clergy who refused to join the Russian Orthodox Church were exiled to the Russian interior of Siberia, by means of mass deportations, persecution, and even executions. The Uniates were practically eliminated in the Russian Empire. Only a small number of Greek Catholics in the Kiev Governorate managed to preserve the faith. Within the Russian Empire, the Uniate Church continued to function until 1875, when the Eparchy of Chelm was abolished. The greater longevity of the Uniate Church in this region was attributed to the fact that it came under Russian control later than did the other territories, and that, unlike other Ukrainian regions within the Russian Empire, it had been part of the Congress Poland, which had some autonomy until 1865. Within Chelm, the conversion to Orthodoxy met with strong resistance from the local ethnic Ukrainian priests and parishioners, and was accomplished largely through the efforts of Russian police, Cossacks, and immigrating Russophile priests from eastern Galicia. The resistance was strong enough that when, a generation later in 1905, the formerly Orthodox population of Chelm was allowed to return to Catholicism, 170,000 out of 450,000 did so by 1908. Austrian Galicia and World War I. Although the partitions of Poland awarded most of the Ruthenian lands to the Russian Empire, this excluded the southwestern kingdom of Galicia, which fell under the control of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Similarly to the situation in the lands of the Russian Empire, the Uniate Ruthenian peasantry was largely under the Polish Latin Catholic domination. The Austrians granted equal legal privileges to the Uniate Church and removed Polish influence. They also mandated that Uniate seminarians receive a formal higher education, and organized institutions in Vienna and Lviv that would serve this function. This led to the appearance, for the first time, of a large educated social class within the Ukrainian population in Galicia. As a result, within Austrian Galicia over the next century, the Uniate Church ceased being a puppet of foreign interests and became the primary cultural force within the Ukrainian community. Most independent native Ukrainian cultural trends emerged from within the ranks of the Uniate Church. The participation of Uniate priests of the children in Western Ukrainian cultural and political life was so great that Western Ukrainians were accused of wanting to create a theocracy in Western Ukraine by the Polish rivals. During the 19th century, there was a struggle within the Uniate Church between Russophiles who desired union with Russia and Ukrainophiles who saw the Galician Ruthenians as Ukrainians, not Russians. The former group were mostly represented by older and more conservative elements of the priesthood, while the latter ideology was more popular among the younger priests. The Russophilia of the Galician Ruthenians was was particularly strong during the mid-19th century, although by the end of that century the Russophiles had declined in importance relative to the Ukrainophiles. The Austrian authorities during this time began to be more and more involved in the power struggle with Russia for the rule of the Balkans, as the declining Ottoman Empire withdrew, and in so doing opposed the Russophiles. The Balkans themselves were largely Orthodox and crucial to the Russian Panslavism movement. In this situation, the Galician Ruthenians found themselves in the pawn's position. When the power struggle erupted into the First World War, the Russian army initially quickly overran Galicia, free of Polish domination. Unlike in other areas of Ukraine, the Uniate Church had become closely linked to the Ukrainian people and the Ukrainian national movement. For this reason, the population in general were quite loyal to the Austrian Habsburgs, earning the nickname Tyroleans of the East, and resisted reunion into the Orthodox Church. A minority of them, however, welcomed the Russians and reverted to Orthodoxy. After regaining the lost territories with the counterattack in late 1914, the Austrian authorities responded with repressions. Several thousand Orthodox and Russophilic people died while being interred at a Talahof concentration camp for those deemed disloyal to Austria. Already a minority, the Russophiles were largely extinguished as a religious cultural force in Galicia as a result of these actions.